Ngozi, a courageous and strong woman, was abandoned by her husband Afani while pregnant, left to face the world alone. Despite heartbreak and hardship, she gave birth to her son Chaik and transformed her pain into strength, building a life of resilience, love, and hope that inspired her entire community. If you enjoy African folk stories filled with mysteries, betrayal, and justice, subscribe, like, and comment where you are watching from, and journey with us as the story begins. The city of Onichikano never slept. Neon signs blinked over crowded streets, motorbikes roared past dusty sidewalks, and hawkers shouted, their voices blending into a symphony of ambition and desperation. In the heart of the city, skyscrapers reflected the sun like golden towers, while slums clung to the shadows, homes of those chasing dreams but trapped by poverty. Among the many souls struggling to survive was Afani, a young man with broad shoulders and calloused hands. He worked long hours at a shipping warehouse, lifting heavy crates under the unforgiving sun, dreaming of a life far beyond the cramped one-room apartment he shared with his wife. Each day, he carried not only physical burdens, but also a restless longing for wealth, power, and recognition. His wife, Ngozi, was the heartbeat of their humble home. Her beauty was quiet, a soft smile that could calm worries, hands worn by labor yet gentle, and a spirit that refused to break under hardship. She prepared their modest meals, swept the cracked floor of their small room, and whispered prayers every morning for Afani's success. She dreamed of a life where their child would laugh freely, and love would always outweigh hardship. Their home, though tiny, was alive with hope. The single light bulb flickered against the peeling paint, casting long shadows that danced like ancestors in prayer. Ngozi often hummed songs from her mother's village, her voice soft, carrying warmth through the empty apartment, while Afani returned from work tired, but grateful, even if his mind wandered toward dreams of grandeur. Yet within Afani, ambition burned dangerously. The city tempted him constantly, luxury cars speeding past dusty roads, men in tailored suits laughing over expensive dinners, women adorned in jewelry that sparkled like the sun. He began to feel a restless envy, a sense that the life he had was too small, too ordinary. And in the quiet corners of the city, fate whispered that the choices he made next would change all their lives forever. The evening sky over Onichikano was painted in bruised purples and burning oranges, the city's glow reflecting off puddles left from the afternoon rain. In their small apartment, Ngozi sat on the edge of the worn mattress, her hands trembling as she held the small envelope from the clinic. Her heart raced, each beat echoing a mixture of fear, hope, and anticipation. She had long suspected that life was about to change. The nausea, the tenderness of her belly, the late-night cravings. Every sign pointed toward a miracle. Now it was confirmed, a child was growing inside her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed her palm gently against her womb, whispering prayers to her ancestors, asking for protection for the new life she carried. When Afani returned from the warehouse, exhausted from a day of heavy labor and city chaos, Ngozi called him to sit beside her. The flickering bulb above cast soft light across her face, highlighting the hope that shone through her tears. Her voice trembled as she revealed the news. Ifani, we are going to have a child. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Ifani's tired eyes widened. A part of him felt warmth, a spark of excitement he had not felt in months. Yet another part, a shadow he could not ignore, felt fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of failure, fear that the city's cruel pace would crush their fragile family before it even began. Ngozi, however, saw only joy. She spoke of dreams for their child, a name filled with meaning, a home warmed by love, and the hope that one day the baby would rise above poverty. She imagined a life where hardship was softened by laughter and love. She hummed songs of the village, describing how she would teach the child to respect elders, embrace tradition, and honor the spirits that had watched over their family for generations. As the night deepened, Ngozi lay awake, gently rubbing her swollen belly. Each kick, each movement, was a tiny heartbeat of hope. Outside, the city never slept. Car horns blared, streetlights flickered, and the wind carried the distant hum of market voices. Yet inside the apartment, a small cocoon of love persisted, fragile but radiant. Meanwhile, Ifani stared at the ceiling, torn between pride and restlessness. The city had taught him desire early, the desire for wealth, for influence, for a life beyond struggle. Even as he held his wife's hands and smiled, a seed of ambition whispered, "There is more. You deserve more." Fate, unseen and patient, began to stir, preparing the crossroads that would soon decide the lives of all three: Ngozi, Ifani, and the unborn child who carried the hope of the family's future. That night, Ngozi whispered softly, "You will protect us, Ifani. I know you will." But deep inside, a small tremor of unease gnawed at her heart, the first sign that love alone might not be enough to guard against ambition, temptation, and the harsh lessons the city was ready to teach. The streets of Onichikano gleamed under the afternoon sun, heat rising in waves off the asphalt. Cars honked in endless symphony, street vendors hawked roasted corn and sugarcane, and the city's pulse vibrated through every corner. To the eyes of the desperate, the city was a battlefield, a place where dreams and ambition collided with poverty. Ifani walked quickly along the crowded road, his body heavy from hours at the warehouse, but his mind restless with desire. Every billboard he passed showcased lives he longed to claim. People in tailored suits, flashing gold, drinking wine in rooftops that kissed the sky. Each image whispered, "You could be one of us, if only you dared." It was at the warehouse office that fate finally intervened. Adato Kunbo, a wealthy and influential woman from the city's elite circles, came to inspect a shipment. She wore a bright Ankara gown, her head wrapped perfectly, gold bracelets jingling softly with each step. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence, her confidence filling the room. To those around her, she was untouchable. To Ifani, she was everything he had ever wanted but thought was impossible. She noticed him immediately, the tall, strong worker lifting boxes tirelessly, sweat dripping from his brow, yet moving with precision and determination. "You have dedication," she said in a voice both warm and commanding. "Tell me, young man, what are your dreams?" Her words were like honey, sinking into him, sweetening thoughts he had long buried. Ifani's heart raced. For the first time, someone influential had not just noticed him, but seemed to believe in him. Adato Kunbo's attention was intoxicating. She spoke of opportunity, wealth, travel, and connections, things the city had always promised but never delivered. She painted vivid pictures of the life he could lead: evenings in rooftop lounges, business deals over champagne, respect from peers who would bow to him. Days turned into weeks, and Ifani found excuses to linger longer at the warehouse, to be near her, to hear her words that stroked his ego and fanned the flames of ambition. The city outside hummed, oblivious, while a storm brewed inside his heart. Every conversation with Adato Kunbo left him craving more, not the woman herself, necessarily, but the lifestyle and status she represented. Meanwhile, Ngozi continued to nurture their small apartment, now swollen with the growing life of their unborn child. She cooked their modest meals with care, cleaned the dusty floors, and hummed the lullabies she had learned from her mother. Each day, she imagined herself holding their child, teaching them love, humility, and the strength to survive the city's harshness. But the nights grew lonelier. Ifani returned home later and later, excuses thin and rehearsed. He stopped asking about her health, stopped feeling the gentle kicks of the baby. The warmth in their home dimmed with each passing day, replaced by tension and the unspoken fear that something sacred was slipping away. One night, Ngozi gently touched his hand and whispered, "Ifani, tell me what troubles you. We can face it together." But he pulled away, distracted by the memory of Adato Kunbo's words, her gaze, the intoxicating taste of possibility. In that moment, love and loyalty fought against greed and ambition, and greed began to win. Outside, the city thrummed, alive with endless opportunity and danger. Fate watched silently, patient as the night, knowing that the choices Ifani made now would echo in tears, heartbreak, and consequences far beyond the small apartment where Ngozi prayed for their family. The city of Onichikano had a rhythm all its own, but for Ngozi, the sounds of bustling streets now carried a weight of loneliness. Motorbikes roared past, street vendors shouted over one another, and neon signs flickered across the evening sky. She sat on the edge of their small mattress, hands folded over her swollen belly, staring at the cracked wall. Every day, she watched Afani leave earlier and return later, his mind drifting further from the family they had built. Afani had begun to change. His once warm greetings had become brief nods. Conversations were curt, distracted. Even the gentle laughter that once filled their home had been replaced with silence or tension. Ngozi noticed every detail: the faint scent of cologne she had never used, the new shirts that carried a city-style sharpness, and the constant glances at his phone when she was near. Despite the growing distance, she tried to hold on. She prepared his meals with care, arranged the small apartment to feel like home, and sang softly to her unborn child. Each song was a prayer, a plea for protection, a hope that the love she shared with Afani would survive the storm creeping into their lives. Yet the city outside seemed to swallow her efforts, making her feel small, powerless, and invisible in the face of ambition's pull. Afani, meanwhile, felt the tug of something he could not resist. Adato Kunbo's presence lingered in his thoughts like a shadow at the edge of his conscience. She praised his work ethic, invited him to city events, and treated him like more than just a laborer, like a man who deserved greatness. In her presence, the weight of poverty lifted from his shoulders, and the allure of wealth became intoxicating. Slowly, he began to justify his absence, telling himself he was working toward a better future, even as the emotional cost to Ngozi and their unborn child grew invisible to him. One rainy evening, Ngozi's heart finally broke in quiet despair. She asked gently, voice trembling, "Ifani, why are you always gone? Why do you seem so far from me?" He avoided her gaze, muttering excuses, fumbling with words, his own heart caught between guilt and desire. For the first time, she felt the unbearable sting of betrayal, not yet acted upon, but alive in the spaces he left empty, in the warmth he withheld, in the promises that now sounded hollow. The apartment, once alive with hope, now felt like a cage. Ngozi would lie awake at night, hands pressed against her belly, whispering soft lullabies. She imagined protecting her child from the heartbreak she could already feel creeping into their lives. Outside, the city pulsed with light and energy, oblivious to the pain unfolding in one tiny apartment among millions. Ifani, walking home from another late meeting with Adato Kunbo, passed neon-lit streets and glowing billboards, his reflection in shop windows showing a man transformed. The ambition in his eyes was bright and hungry, but the love in his heart for Ngozi was dimming, slipping away like water through fingers. Fate, patient and silent, waited in the shadows, ready to turn his choices into lessons carved in tears. That night, Ngozi whispered prayers to her ancestors and the unborn child, promising protection, love, and resilience. But even as she prayed, a chill of foreboding settled into her chest. A quiet knowledge that their family was now on the fragile edge of disaster, one that would test love, loyalty, and the harsh justice of the city. The rain fell in heavy sheets over Onichikano, turning the streets into rivers of light and reflection. Motorbikes splashed past, neon signs shimmered in puddles, and the city hummed with life, indifferent to the storms inside the small apartment of Ngozi and Ifani. That night, Ngozi cooked a simple meal of yam porridge and beans, her hands gentle and careful despite her swollen belly. She hoped for a quiet evening, a small moment of connection with the man she had loved faithfully for years. But Ifani returned late again, the scent of expensive cologne clinging to his clothes, a nervous tension in his posture. His eyes avoided hers, shifting to the floor, then the clock, then anything that would delay the inevitable confrontation with the guilt gnawing at his chest. Ngozi looked at him silently, hope in her eyes, wondering why the man she trusted so deeply had become a stranger in his own home. Earlier that day, Ifani had met Adato Kunbo again, this time in her luxurious apartment high above the city. The skyline sparkled like diamonds, and the air smelled of perfume, coffee, and wealth. He had allowed himself to be praised, flattered, and tempted, telling himself it was harmless, a stepping stone to the success he craved. But in the soft music, the warm lighting, and the touch of her hand on his shoulder, he crossed the line between temptation and betrayal. As Ngozi washed the few dishes in their small sink, she noticed a faint shiver run through her body, a warning instinct she could not name. She thought about the unborn child, about the future she had dreamed of. Her hands trembled slightly, as she set the last plate to dry. Deep in her heart, she sensed the quiet but growing distance between her husband and her own soul. She whispered prayers, calling upon her ancestors to protect them, to guide Afani back to the love they had once shared. That night, as Afani entered their apartment, he could not meet her gaze. The guilt was a silent weight, but desire had clouded his judgment. He avoided conversation, leaving Ngozi alone in the quiet of the room, the soft hum of the city filtering through the cracked windows. Her heart ached with silent understanding. Something vital had shifted, something fragile had broken, and she could feel the first real fracture in the foundation of their family. In the quiet darkness, Ngozi pressed a hand against her belly, whispering words of protection and love for the child she carried. Each kick, each flutter, felt like a fragile heartbeat of hope, yet also a reminder of what might be lost. Outside, the city pulsed with life, cars, neon lights, laughter, and ambition. But inside their apartment, love began to fray, and betrayal stretched its long, dark fingers toward the family's heart. Fate, patient and inevitable, watched silently. Every decision, every stolen glance, every longing for wealth and status over loyalty, was a thread being woven into a tapestry of heartbreak. And though Ngozi remained unaware of the full scope of the betrayal yet to come, the storm had begun, and it would not be stopped. The morning sun of Onichikano was muted behind heavy clouds, and the streets shimmered from last night's rain. Vendors swept water from cracked sidewalks, children ran barefoot through puddles, and the city roared with a relentless rhythm that swallowed the lonely and the hopeful alike. Inside a small apartment in a quiet corner of the city, Ngozi awoke to silence. The soft rhythm of Afani's breathing beside her had vanished. He had already left. She rose slowly, placing a hand over her swollen belly, feeling the tiny kicks that reminded her of the life she carried, a life she could not protect from the growing coldness in her husband's heart. She walked to the window and watched the busy streets below, longing for something she could not name, a hint of his love, a reassurance that he still cared. But the streets offered nothing but strangers rushing past, indifferent to her pain. Afani had begun leaving earlier, returning later, and speaking less. His absences were no longer excuses, but deliberate choices. Each night, Ngozi would wait, watching the clock, hoping that perhaps he had changed his mind, that perhaps love could triumph over the intoxicating promise of wealth. But night after night, disappointment replaced hope. Earlier that week, Afani had attended a private dinner with Adato Kunbo, a lavish affair at a rooftop restaurant high above the city. Champagne sparkled in crystal flutes, laughter echoed in marble halls, and the skyline spread beneath them like a promise. He had told himself it was harmless, an investment in connections, a way to climb higher. But as Adato Kunbo's hand brushed his across the table, a shiver ran through him. The warmth he once reserved for Ngozi had been transferred, little by little, to the allure of wealth, power, and admiration. Back in their apartment, Ngozi prepared breakfast for one, her hands moving mechanically. The simple yam porridge smelled faintly of home, yet the air felt empty, heavy with absence. She whispered to her unborn child, "Your father will return to us. I know he will." But even as she spoke, a knot of unease twisted in her chest. She remembered the cologne she could not identify, the whispered conversations over the phone, the distant look in his eyes. The man she loved was becoming a stranger, replaced by ambition and desire she could not compete with. That afternoon, when Afani finally returned, he walked past her without a word. His eyes darted to his phone, a text from Adato Kunbo lighting up the screen, a smile that belonged to someone else tugging at the corner of his lips. Ngozi's heart sank. She had tried patience, kindness, understanding, yet nothing she did could reach him. He was no longer the man who held her hand through hunger, who stayed awake when she cried, who dreamed aloud of their future. The apartment grew colder that evening. Ngozi sat with her belly pressed gently against the mattress, whispering prayers into the dark. "Protect my child. Give us strength. Don't let him forget what love means." Outside, the city hummed with life, neon lights flickering in puddles, cars honking in endless chaos, indifferent to the heartbreak of a woman abandoned in the pursuit of someone else's wealth. Ifani lay on the other side of the room, scrolling through messages and plans for future meetings with Adato Kunbo. Each message, each appointment, pulled him further away from the home he once cherished. Fate, silent and unyielding, leaned closer, preparing the consequences of a man who had chosen ambition over loyalty, leaving a pregnant wife in the shadow of a city that offered no mercy. And in that small, dim apartment, love became a fragile memory, hope a fragile ember, and betrayal the beginning of a storm that would not stop until it had swept everything away. The city of Onichikano burned with life as Ngozi walked along the crowded streets, carrying a small basket of food for the day. Vendors shouted, children ran barefoot through puddles, and motorbikes weaved dangerously between pedestrians. But all of it faded from her mind, drowned by a storm in her heart. The absence of Afani weighed heavier with each passing day, and a gnawing fear had begun to take root. Earlier that morning, a neighbor had whispered something that Ngozi could not ignore. I heard him meeting a rich woman downtown. They say he spends nights at her place, leaving you here with the child. The words had hit her like a thunderbolt. Her stomach churned not from hunger, but from the realization that her husband, the man she had trusted with her life and the life of her unborn child, might already be gone from her heart, if not her home. Back at the apartment, she tried to speak to Afani. Her voice shook, heavy with fear and desperation. Afani, please, tell me the truth. Are you with someone else? He looked away, a coldness she had never seen in his eyes before. He muttered excuses about work, about meetings, about responsibilities, but Ngozi saw through the cracks. The truth was there, hidden only by his practiced lies. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her hand to her belly, whispering softly to the child she carried. Your father. I hope he remembers us. I hope he remembers love. The baby kicked lightly, as if sensing the tension, and Ngozi held herself together through the pain, drawing strength from the life inside her. But the ache in her heart was unbearable, a wound that the city's noise, its flashing lights, and its crowded streets could not drown out. That night, Ngozi stayed awake, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the wail of sirens, and the quiet hum of the neon lights that flickered through their window. Ifani returned late, tired and disheveled, yet his eyes were brighter than ever, alive with excitement for a life that no longer included her. He spoke little, his mind consumed by plans, meetings, and ambitions. Ngozi realized that she had lost him, perhaps forever. She fell to her knees beside the bed, pressing her face to the mattress, and cried not just for herself, but for the child who would grow in a home now hollowed by betrayal. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, indifferent to the pain of a woman abandoned, a marriage unraveling, and a future suddenly uncertain. The night deepened, and Ngozi whispered prayers that echoed through the quiet room. Give me strength. Give my child protection. Let my heart endure. Every tear she shed was a testament to love betrayed, to innocence lost, and to the cruel lessons that ambition can carve into human hearts. Fate had begun its work, patient and merciless, and the threads of their family were already fraying beyond repair. The morning sunlight in Onichikano filtered weakly through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the small apartment that had once been a home filled with laughter and hope. Ngozi moved quietly, careful not to wake Afani, though she knew he would not linger long today. The apartment smelled faintly of yesterday's meals, and the silence pressed down on her like the weight of the city itself. For days, she had felt the shift in her husband, the way his hands lingered on his phone, the way he checked the time obsessively, the spark in his eyes that belonged to someone else. Today, however, the truth would strike her with full force. She watched him gather his bag, his movements sharp and deliberate, his focus elsewhere. She had tried pleading, reasoning, begging for honesty, but every word had been met with excuses, distractions, and the cold shield of ambition. I'm leaving, Ifani said, voice curt, avoiding her gaze. I have a meeting with a client. You know how important this is for us. But Ngozi knew, she had always known, that this was more than business. His eyes were brighter, his shoulders lighter, his mind elsewhere, and she understood fully that his heart no longer belonged to her. She placed her hand on her swollen belly, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ifani, tell me you will come back. Tell me that love still matters. Her voice trembled, cracking under the weight of fear and desperation. He hesitated for a moment, as if part of him wanted to say something, anything to comfort her. But ambition had won. With a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him like a final verdict. Ngozi sank to the floor, pressing her face into her hands, feeling both the emptiness of the apartment and the tiny life stirring within her. "My child, we will survive," she whispered, each word a vow and a prayer. Outside, the city continued its chaotic rhythm. Cars honked, street vendors shouted, neon lights blinked, all oblivious to the heartbreak unfolding in a single apartment. Hours later, Ngozi learned the final truth. A neighbor, a woman she had trusted, had glimpsed Afani entering Adetokunbo's luxurious high-rise apartment the night before. The whispers were undeniable. He had chosen a life of wealth, comfort, and admiration over her, over their child, over the home they had built together. Each word sank into Ngozi like a dagger. Her body shook with sobs that echoed through the small, hollow apartment. That evening, she sat by the window, hand on her belly, watching the city glow. The streets sparkled with opportunity, but they offered nothing for her, only reminders of betrayal, abandonment, and dreams shattered. She whispered softly to the child she carried, "I will protect you. Even if he cannot love us, I will. Even if the world turns its back, I will not." Fate, patient and unyielding, had begun its work. Each choice Afani had made had consequences already set in motion. Ngozi would endure hardship, heartbreak, and loneliness, but strength and resilience ran in her blood. The child she carried would inherit that resilience, and one day, the scales of justice, silent, inevitable, and absolute, would balance the life he had chosen. That night, Ngozi fell asleep sitting upright, holding her belly. Outside, the city thrummed endlessly, lights blinking like distant stars, indifferent to pain, ambition, and betrayal. Inside, however, a seed of unyielding strength took root in the heart of a woman betrayed, and in the life she carried, the first spark of destiny began to glow. The first weeks after Afani's departure were the hardest of Ngozi's life. The apartment, once alive with shared laughter and whispered dreams, now felt hollow, every corner echoing with absence. She woke each morning to silence, carrying the growing life in her womb as both a blessing and a heavy responsibility. The city of Onichikano thrummed relentlessly outside her window, indifferent to the suffering of one woman in a million. Ngozi began walking to the local market, balancing baskets of vegetables and grains on her head to earn a meager income. The vendors knew her gentle nature, the kindness that had always defined her, and they offered small discounts or leftover goods. Each day was a battle, the heat of the sun, the weight of her body, the pain of betrayal. Yet she persisted, driven by love for the child she carried. At night, she returned to the apartment, exhausted, but she spoke to her belly, whispering words of protection and encouragement. "You will grow strong, my child. You will know love, honesty, and courage. Even if your father has forgotten us, I will never forget you." Each kick of the baby seemed to answer back, tiny yet fierce, reminding her that life continues even in the harshest storms. Meanwhile, Ifani lived a life of glittering luxury with Adetokunbo. High-rise apartments, expensive suits, rooftop dinners, and parties filled his days and nights. Yet the excitement was hollow. In the mirror, he sometimes caught a glimpse of himself, the man who had abandoned his pregnant wife for ambition, and felt a pang that he quickly dismissed. But desire, pride, and greed clouded any trace of guilt. The city had offered him everything he wanted, and he convinced himself that Ngozi's quiet suffering was irrelevant, a small price for success. Back in her tiny apartment, Ngozi became more than a mother-to-be. She became a survivor. She learned to stretch every coin, barter with vendors, and navigate the bustling streets with careful determination. Each challenge hardened her, yet she never lost her warmth or her heart. Neighbors began to notice her quiet strength, offering support where they could. Children she passed in the street would smile, sensing her gentle energy, unaware of the storm that had broken over her life. One evening, after returning from the market, Ngozi sat on the balcony of her tiny apartment, watching the city lights shimmer in puddles from the day's rain. The hum of traffic, the shouts of street vendors, and the neon reflections seemed almost magical in their own way. She whispered again to her unborn child, "No matter what, we will rise. We will survive. We will thrive." The words were a promise, a vow to herself and the child she carried, a vow that would carry her through betrayal, hardship, and heartbreak. Fate, patient and unyielding, watched silently. Ifani had chosen wealth over loyalty, ambition over love. But life has a way of balancing its scales, of weaving justice into the lives of those who abandon kindness. Ngozi did not yet know how it would happen, but the strength she nurtured in these dark days was the foundation of a destiny that would one day bring reckoning. And in the quiet of her small apartment, the city humming far below, she realized something profound. Even abandoned, even betrayed, she was unbreakable. Her heart, though wounded, still beat with courage, hope, and the certainty that love, even in solitude, is a force that cannot be destroyed. The city of Onichikano sparkled at night, a glittering kingdom of ambition, wealth, and illusion. Neon signs reflected off glass towers, streetlights glowed in puddles from earlier rain, and the hum of traffic created a constant, unyielding rhythm. From above, in a luxurious apartment perched high in the skyline, Ifani looked out at the city, dressed in a crisp suit, a glass of red wine in hand. On the surface, he had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, admiration, and the presence of Adato Kunbo by his side. Yet inside, a quiet unease gnawed at him. In the mirror, he saw a man who had abandoned love for luxury, who had forsaken loyalty for glittering promises. At dinner parties, people complimented his success, laughed at his jokes, and admired his confidence, but no one whispered the words he truly longed for. The words of a heart at peace, the warmth of being loved without condition. He began to feel an emptiness that no amount of money, praise, or fine wine could fill. Meanwhile, Ngozi continued to survive and thrive in her modest apartment, her belly growing heavier with the life she carries. She walked through the crowded streets daily, carrying baskets of vegetables, engaging in small trades, and speaking kindly to neighbors. Each day brought hardship, yet each hardship built a resilience inside her that Ifani had never known. Every challenge reminded her of her purpose, her child, and her own survival. One afternoon, a sudden business crisis hit Ifani's life. A shipment he had approved in haste for Adato Kunbo's connections went missing. Clients called, emails piled up, and the luxury he had so recently embraced began to show cracks. For the first time, he felt the pangs of real consequence, a tremor in the smooth illusion he had built around wealth. Adato Kunbo's smiles were sharp now, tinged with frustration. The golden world he had stepped into was not as flawless as it had seemed. At home, Ngozi held her belly and laughed softly to the unborn child, feeling each kick as though the baby herself whispered courage. Despite poverty, loneliness, and betrayal, she felt power growing within her. She reminded herself that life could still be beautiful, that justice is patient, and that a day would come when the scales of destiny would balance. The city may have been harsh, but it had also made her unbreakable. That evening, Ifani returned to his luxury apartment late, exhausted not from labor, but from stress he could not control. He poured himself another glass of wine, staring at the skyline he had once dreamed of conquering. For the first time, he realized that wealth without love, ambition without loyalty, and luxury without conscience carried a bitter emptiness. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that choices have consequences, that what is given in betrayal is often repaid in ways one cannot foresee. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, indifferent yet ever watchful. Neon lights reflected in puddles like stars, as if reminding the world that beauty can coexist with despair. Inside, Ifani felt the first real cracks in the life he had stolen from Ngozi and himself. And far below, in her small apartment, a woman abandoned but unbroken smiled softly, whispering promises of resilience to a child who would grow strong enough to witness justice firsthand. Fate, silent as the night, leaned closer. It had begun its work, patiently, inevitably, and without mercy. The next chapters of betrayal, endurance, and reckoning were already written in the stars, ready to unfold. The city of Onichikano had never felt so alive. The sounds of vendors, honking cars, and children playing outside filtered through the walls of Ngozi's small apartment. But inside, a different rhythm pulsed, the labor of creation, the struggle between pain and life. Her hands gripped the edge of a wooden chair, sweat dripping from her brow, and every breath felt like a battle. The child she carried, a symbol of love, hope, and survival, demanded courage beyond what she had ever imagined. For hours, Ngozi's cries echoed through the narrow alleyways outside their apartment. Neighbors came with water, soft words, and prayers. Some whispered encouragement, others simply held her hands, knowing the fight she faced was both physical and spiritual. She breathed deeply, pressing her hands against her belly, whispering, "You will be strong. You will be brave. You will know love even if the world forgets us." Each contraction was sharp, excruciating, but she endured, fueled by hope and the bond she already felt with the tiny life inside her. Meanwhile, Ifani sat high above the city in Adetokunbo's penthouse, a glass of champagne trembling in his hand. The phone rang incessantly, clients complaining, shipments delayed, small crises piling into chaos. The luxury he had chased so ruthlessly was revealing its fragility. Adetokunbo's smiles had grown thin, her patience waning. He had wealth, but it was no longer the perfect fantasy he had imagined. Somewhere, in the back of his mind, a shadow of guilt crept in, faint but unrelenting. Back in her apartment, Ngozi felt the first rush of relief and joy, a tiny cry slicing through the night. A child had been born, a son. She held him close, feeling the warmth of life and the steady beat of a heart that would soon learn resilience and strength from her example. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mingling exhaustion, grief, and unimaginable love. "Welcome to the world, Chike," she whispered softly, her voice cracking. "You are everything. You are hope. You are my heart." Despite poverty, loneliness, and betrayal, she had created life, and in that act, she discovered a power she had never known. She cared for her newborn with a tenderness that seemed to illuminate the small apartment, her strength rippling through the walls and into the city beyond. Each small cry, each tiny breath of the child reminded her that she could endure anything, survive anything, and rise above even the deepest betrayal. Far above, Ifani scrolled through messages and social media updates, hearing about his old life, watching announcements he could not control, feeling the first real pangs of emptiness. He had chosen wealth and luxury, but it could not replace love, loyalty, or family. Each missed cry, each empty moment, each fleeting thrill of extravagance reminded him of what he had lost. And far below, Ngozi, abandoned but unbroken, held life in her arms, unaware that destiny was already preparing to repay ambition with justice. That night, she sat rocking her son, whispering lullabies her mother had taught her, and praying silently for their future. The city outside glittered like a dream she had once believed in, but she had learned its harsh truth. Survival, love, and courage mattered more than luxury and wealth. Fate, patient and deliberate, had begun weaving its threads, setting the stage for reckoning, justice, and the return of what had been stolen. And in the small apartment, with her newborn son nestled against her chest, Ngozi knew something indelible. She was unbreakable. Betrayal had come, life had tested her, yet she had endured. And somewhere above, in the gleaming heights of the city, Ifani was learning, slowly, painfully, that choices have consequences. The sun rose over Onichikano, painting the city in shades of gold and orange. Yet in the penthouse high above the streets, Ifani felt only gray. The thrill of wealth and luxury that had once filled him with pride was now hollow, replaced by anxiety and unease. Emails demanding explanations, clients threatening to withdraw contracts, and the relentless pressure of maintaining a lifestyle he could barely manage pressed down on him like the weight of the city itself. Adetokunbo, once radiant with admiration for his ambition, began to show cracks in patience. Her smiles were thinner, her laughter forced, her questions sharper. "Ifani, this shipment was delayed again. Your connections promised delivery. What happened?" Her tone was not cruel, but precise, the kind of precision that leaves no room for excuses. And for the first time, Ifani realized that charm and flattery could not shield him from responsibility. Meanwhile, Ngozi thrived quietly in the modest apartment that had become a haven for resilience. She had begun selling homemade snacks in the neighborhood market, weaving baskets, and sewing small garments to earn a living. Every coin she earned was hard-won, yet it carried pride, independence, and the knowledge that she could survive without Afani. She sang softly to her son, Chaik, who had begun to smile in his mother's arms, unaware of the betrayal that had brought them to this point, but feeling the love and strength radiating from her every movement. One afternoon, as Ngozi bartered with a vendor for tomatoes, word reached her through the market grapevine. Afani's luxurious business ventures were facing collapse. Mistakes in shipment, poor judgment in investment, and the failure to maintain relationships with clients were beginning to unravel the life he had chased at the expense of love. The whispers carried both shock and schadenfreude. The city, in its indifferent way, had begun balancing the scales. Ngozi felt a strange mixture of sorrow and quiet vindication. She did not rejoice in misfortune, but she understood the inevitability of justice. Fate, patient and meticulous, had begun to respond to the choices Afani had made. Meanwhile, she focused on her child, her business, and the life she was creating, a life rooted in love, integrity, and resilience. The small apartment seemed warmer than ever, filled with laughter and light, while Afani's penthouse, once a palace, was becoming a prison of anxiety, isolation, and the realization that wealth cannot replace what was lost. At night, Afani paced the polished floors of the apartment, wine untouched, staring at the city below. The glittering lights no longer dazzled him. They mocked him, reflecting a life built on betrayal and ambition rather than loyalty and love. For the first time, he felt regret, not fleeting, but deep and gnawing. He imagined Ngozi with their child, smiling, surviving, thriving despite hardship. And somewhere deep inside, a bitter seed of understanding began to sprout. Every choice has a consequence. Every betrayal carries a price, and the happiness he had chased was not his to claim. Meanwhile, Ngozi tucked Chaik into a small handmade crib, the child's gentle breathing a symphony of hope. She whispered prayers for protection, love, and endurance, feeling the power of survival and motherhood coursing through her veins. She was no longer a woman defined by betrayal. She was a force of life and courage. And far above, in his cold luxury, Afani began to feel the first weight of a justice that would not be denied, the first tremor of a fate he had once ignored. The city hummed on, indifferent yet exacting. Its streets, lights, and chaos reflected the lives of those who had chosen ambition over loyalty. Fate had begun its work, slowly tightening around the man who had abandoned love and strengthening the woman who had endured it. And in the quiet of a small apartment, love, resilience, and hope flourished like a candle in the night, bright, unwavering, and impossible to extinguish. The city of Onichikano glimmered under the midday sun, alive with the chaos of traffic, the chatter of market women, and the endless rhythm of ambition. From the top floors of a gleaming skyscraper, Afani once looked down at the city as if it belonged to him. But now, the view felt different, empty, hollow, and mocking. Clients were pulling away, investments were failing, and whispers of mismanagement began circulating through the very circles he had once aspired to dominate. Adato Kunbo's patience had worn thin. Where once she had praised his intelligence and vision, now her words were sharp and precise. Ifani, your shipment errors are not just mistakes. They are costly. People are losing trust in you. What is happening? Each word was a blade, cutting through the armor of ego he had built around himself. For the first time, the glittering life he had fought to attain revealed its fragility. Meanwhile, Ngozi had grown into a quiet but formidable presence in her community. Mothers sought her advice. Neighbors came to her for small trades, and even local merchants trusted her judgment in matters of commerce. Her small apartment, once a place of sorrow and loneliness, became a hub of hope and practical wisdom. She smiled softly as her son, Chaik, played beside her, the light of resilience reflected in his eyes, the child of love and survival. Ngozi had also begun teaching other women skills she had learned: sewing, basket weaving, and small-scale trading. Each lesson she shared built not only their income, but their confidence. The streets she once walked quietly now hummed with recognition. People began to whisper her name with respect, not for wealth or influence, but for courage, kindness, and integrity. Her life, though modest, was rich with purpose and meaning, something Ifani had once believed only money could provide. Ifani, in contrast, faced an unraveling empire. A shipment of goods he had promised to a major client never arrived. Another investor withdrew support after discovering mismanaged funds. Adato Kunbo, frustrated and disappointed, began questioning her decisions. The glamour he had once flaunted now felt like a prison. Every light, every celebration, a reminder of what he had sacrificed for ambition and desire. He began to understand that loyalty and love are worth more than any gold or champagne, but it was too late to reclaim them. That evening, Ngozi returned from the market with Chike in her arms. The city hummed below, oblivious to the quiet triumph unfolding above the noise. She prepared a simple meal, sharing small pieces with neighbors who had become her friends, her strength radiating in the smallest acts of kindness. Each gesture built a legacy of love, endurance, and resilience. A stark contrast to Afani's life, which teetered precariously on betrayal, greed, and poor judgment. In his penthouse, Afani poured himself a drink, staring at the skyline that had once symbolized his dreams. But the bright lights now reflected shadows, missed opportunities, broken trust, and a gnawing emptiness. He realized that ambition without loyalty and success without love left a hollow man staring at a city he could not conquer. The whispers of gossip, the thin smiles of those who had once admired him, and the mounting financial troubles were fate's first warnings, a prelude to the reckoning that could no longer be ignored. Far below, Ngozi sang softly to Chike, her voice carrying through the small apartment and into the night. "You will grow knowing love, courage, and strength," she whispered, each note a declaration of victory not in wealth, but in life, heart, and legacy. Fate, patient and inevitable, had begun to balance its scales. One life had been hollowed by betrayal, another fortified by endurance and love. And the city of Onichikano, indifferent yet perfect in its cosmic justice, hummed as destiny quietly, inexorably, unfolded. The streets of Onichikano were alive with the usual chaos, hawkers shouting over each other, children laughing in puddles, and the roar of cars weaving between motorbikes. But high above the city, in the gleaming offices of the elite, Afani faced a storm he could no longer ignore. Clients had begun canceling contracts, investors withdrew support, and whispers of incompetence and mismanagement circulated faster than he could control. His empire, once a symbol of ambition fulfilled, was cracking. Adato Kunbo, sitting across from him at a polished glass table, looked both disappointed and furious. "Afani, these errors are unacceptable. Our reputation is at stake. How do you expect me to explain your negligence to our clients?" Her voice was cold, precise, and carried the weight of authority he could not challenge. For the first time, he felt the vulnerability of the life he had built on ambition alone. Meanwhile, news of his failures began circulating through social media and city gossip. Messages of ridicule and disappointment reached him. Partners questioning his judgment, acquaintances whispering about the man who had abandoned love for luxury. The city, always indifferent to hardship, now watched with keen attention as the man who had once walked confidently among the elite faltered. Pride and ego, which had carried him so far, now seemed to mock him in the reflection of polished glass and neon lights. Far below, Ngozi continued to rise in the quiet dignity of her small apartment. Neighbors and friends sought her advice on business, parenting, and resilience. Her influence in the community grew, not through wealth, but through strength, kindness, and unwavering courage. She held Chike close, watching him grow strong and curious, a living testament to love, endurance, and integrity. Each day, her reputation became more luminous, a stark contrast to the man who had abandoned her for fleeting luxury. That evening, Ifani returned to his apartment, the city lights below mocking his once gleaming dreams. He poured a drink, staring out at the skyline, now a symbol not of triumph, but of failure. The messages on his phone continued to pile up, missed payments, angry clients, and gossip that spread faster than he could respond. Wealth had not protected him, influence had not shielded him, and love, the one thing he had abandoned, remained beyond his reach. Ngozi, meanwhile, rocked her son gently in the modest apartment, singing a lullaby her mother had taught her. The glow from the small lamp cast long shadows, highlighting the warmth of their tiny home. She whispered to Chike, "One day you will know that love and courage matter more than gold. We will survive, thrive, and rise, no matter what the city throws at us. Fate, silent but relentless, was already at work. One life shattered by betrayal, another fortified by resilience. The scales of justice had begun to tip. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm. Neon lights flickered, cars honked, and life moved on. Yet within the hearts of those who had been tested, the lessons of fate were becoming undeniable. Betrayal carries consequences, endurance builds power, and no amount of wealth can replace integrity, loyalty, and love. For Afani, the first true public humiliation had arrived. For Ngozi, the first undeniable victory of survival, influence, and resilience had begun. The morning sun over Onichikano shimmered against the puddles left by last night's rain, casting the busy streets in golden light. Vendors shouted over one another, hawking roasted corn, plantains, and tomatoes, while children ran barefoot, their laughter cutting through the city's endless hum. In the midst of it all, Ngozi walked steadily, chike cradled against her chest, baskets of vegetables balanced expertly on her head. Her presence commanded quiet respect, not from wealth, but from courage, dignity, and the quiet power of survival. Neighbors waved, merchants greeted her with smiles, and young women paused to seek her advice. Ngozi, one whispered, how do you do it all? You have your child, your work, and yet you remain so strong. She smiled softly, ruffling Chike's hair. Life has a way of testing us, she replied gently. But strength comes from endurance and love, not from luxury or wealth. Every word she spoke resonated, her reputation growing with every act of kindness, every piece of guidance shared, and every small victory she achieved. Meanwhile, high above in the gleaming penthouse, Ifani felt the first real isolation of his luxurious life. Clients were disappearing, partners whispering behind his back. Even Adato Kunbo, once enthralled by his ambition, now questioned his judgment openly. Invitations to elite parties dwindled, and the whispers in the city about his mismanagement and failures grew louder. The prestige he had pursued so relentlessly began to crumble, revealing a life hollowed by betrayal and ego. Ifani tried to reach out to friends and colleagues, but many had grown wary of his choices. Connections he had once relied on were turning away, unwilling to risk association with a man whose decisions had caused financial and reputational losses. Even the admiration of others in his circle, which had once made him feel invincible, now felt like a hollow echo in a vast, empty hall. For the first time, he understood the weight of choices made in pursuit of desire without loyalty. Back in her small apartment, Ngozi organized a community gathering, teaching women to sew, trade, and save. Children ran around her, curious and laughing, while neighbors listened attentively to her guidance. The apartment, once small and cramped, now felt alive with hope and resilience. Chike sat on a mat, his tiny hands mimicking his mother's movements, learning the same lessons of courage, patience, and resourcefulness. Ngozi realized that despite betrayal and hardship, she had built a life rooted in respect, love, and purpose. As evening fell, Ifani returned to his penthouse, weary not from labor, but from stress and humiliation. He poured a drink, staring at the city below, once a symbol of his dreams, now a reflection of everything he had lost. The luxury that had once dazzled him now felt like a cage. No amount of wealth could repair the relationships he had abandoned or the life he had forsaken. Every failure, every whisper of gossip, every disappointed glance from Adato Kunbo reminded him of the choices that had brought him here. Far below, Ngozi tucked Chike into bed and whispered softly, "You will know the world through courage, kindness, and love. You will rise because we endure, even when life is unfair." Her voice, calm and certain, carried the weight of resilience and the quiet satisfaction of justice slowly unfolding. Fate had begun its work, one life strengthened, the other unraveling, and the city of Onichikano bore witness, indifferent yet perfect in its execution. And in the quiet of her small apartment lit by a single lamp and the love she carried in her arms, Ngozi realized something profound. Betrayal had tested her, hardship had shaped her, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. Meanwhile, high above, Ifani tasted for the first time the bitter truth. Ambition without love, wealth without loyalty, and success built on betrayal is fragile and eventually it falls. The streets of Onichikano were alive with noise, neon, and the pulse of city life. Yet in the quiet heart of the market, Ngozi had become a beacon of hope. Women gathered around her, listening intently as she taught sewing, small-scale trading, and the value of saving every coin. Children followed her, imitating her movements, inspired by the calm strength radiating from her presence. Chike, now a lively toddler, played beside her, laughing and tugging at fabrics. Ngozi's love and patience extended not only to him, but to every person who sought guidance. She had transformed her small apartment into a center of resilience, a place where hardship was met with courage and despair was met with hope. Meanwhile, Ifani's social circle began to crumble. The whispers of financial mismanagement reached even those who had once envied his rise. Invitations to elite gatherings stopped arriving. Former friends now regarded him with suspicion. The glittering life he had chased was beginning to feel hollow, empty, and isolating. Adato Kunbo, frustrated with the mounting errors and his inability to control crises, started questioning their partnership publicly. Friends and colleagues who had once praised Ifani now whispered behind his back about the man who had abandoned love for ambition. The first cracks of humiliation were forming, and they would not be repaired easily. By evening, Ngozi sat on the balcony, Chike asleep in her arms. She watched the city lights, reflecting on how far she had come. From despair, betrayal, and poverty, she had built strength, influence, and respect. And somewhere above, Ifani's hollow world was beginning to crack, a silent herald of justice being served. Word spread fast in Onichikano, and soon Ifani found himself facing the public consequences of his choices. A failed business deal went viral online, and social media posts circulated about the man who had abandoned his pregnant wife for wealth and luxury. He became a cautionary tale, the ambitious man who valued gold over love, ambition over family. Ngozi, however, continued her quiet rise. Local women sought her out for mentorship, sharing meals and advice. She became known as a woman who turned heartbreak into power, poverty into opportunity, and betrayal into motivation. Her son, Chike, laughed as she taught him, absorbing lessons of courage and integrity even at his young age. Ifani, high above the streets, stared at his phone in disbelief. Friends turned away, partners withdrew, and even Adato Kunbo's patience waned. Each notification was a reminder that wealth alone could not protect him from the consequences of betrayal. His confidence, once unshakable, faltered, replaced by anxiety and fear. Meanwhile, Ngozi hosted a small gathering for women in the community, teaching them ways to trade, sew, and create independence. Her story became one of inspiration, a woman abandoned, yet rising, flourishing, and reshaping the lives of those around her. The contrast between her life and Ifani's crumbling world became sharper each day. By nightfall, Ifani poured himself a drink, staring at the city lights that now mocked him. Every choice he had made was reflected back in isolation, gossip, and the beginnings of social exile. He understood now that ambition without loyalty, wealth without integrity, and success built on betrayal could not stand the test of time. Ngozi's reputation had become the heartbeat of her community. Women came to her for advice, neighbors sought her counsel, and even local leaders began acknowledging her wisdom. She helped children learn, taught adults trade skills, and offered comfort to those facing hardship. Her small apartment had become a sanctuary of hope, resilience, and love. Chike was growing strong, bright-eyed and curious, learning values Ngozi embodied: courage, patience, and compassion. Each day, she whispered lessons to him, telling him, "Even when life is unfair, we rise. We survive. We thrive." Her words were seeds, planting resilience for a generation. Meanwhile, Ifani's social life deteriorated further. Adato Kunbo began to distance herself, frustrated with his failures and increasing isolation. Friends avoided him, clients doubted him, and gossip painted him as a man who had lost everything: wealth, love, and respect. The city had begun its subtle reckoning. Ngozi continued to flourish quietly, untouched by wealth or status, yet radiating power in her integrity and perseverance. Fate's balance was becoming visible, one life rising from betrayal, another falling under the weight of choices. That night, Ngozi held Chike close and whispered, "We are strong. We endure." We will see justice, and it will be gentle but true. And far above, Ifani, alone in his luxurious cage, began to feel the sting of a life built on false foundations. Ifani's first real public humiliation came when a major client pulled out of a deal live on social media. Videos circulated, showing his failed promises, absent management, and mistakes that had cost people money. Colleagues shook their heads, and the city whispered his downfall with delight. Each word, each post, echoed the betrayal that had defined his choices. Ngozi, meanwhile, continued to thrive. Her community work attracted attention from local media, celebrating a woman who had overcome betrayal, poverty, and hardship to become a beacon of resilience. She smiled gently, holding Chike as she spoke to neighbors about the importance of integrity, courage, and love. Ifani, pacing his apartment, felt panic rising. The life he had believed was secure was unraveling in front of his eyes. Wealth could not protect him, influence could not shield him, and charm could not erase the public perception of failure. He realized that ambition without loyalty and greed without conscience always carries consequences. Ngozi, in her small apartment, held Chike and whispered softly, "One day, you will see that honesty, courage, and love are more powerful than gold and glitter." The city's lights shimmered in the night, reflecting not the wealth he had chased, but the integrity and resilience she had built. Fate, patient and deliberate, had begun its work. One life was crumbling under the weight of betrayal, while another thrived under the guidance of love, endurance, and moral strength. The scales were tilting unmistakably. Months passed, and the city's whispers of Ifani's failures became louder. Deals collapsed, partners abandoned him, and even Adito Kunbo severed ties, leaving him isolated in his high-rise apartment. Luxury and wealth could not compensate for betrayal, and the man who had abandoned love now faced the consequences in full view of a city that once admired him. Ngozi, on the other hand, had become a respected leader in her community. She taught, mentored, and inspired. Chike laughed and played, growing strong, curious, and full of life. People looked to her as an example, a woman who had turned heartbreak into empowerment and betrayal into strength. Ifani, pacing in his empty apartment, felt the crushing weight of choices made in pursuit of ambition. Nights once filled with celebration were now empty, silent, and bitter. The city, indifferent yet perfect in its justice, reflected back the cost of betrayal. Ngozi held Chike in her arms one evening, rocking him gently as she whispered, "Justice is patient, my child. It comes to those who endure and live with integrity." Far above, Ifani understood too late. Betrayal carries a price. Ambition without loyalty is hollow, and wealth without love is meaningless. The city of Onichikano carried on, but the lives within it had changed forever. One life had fallen through pride and betrayal. Another had risen through courage, love, and resilience. And somewhere in the night, fate smiled quietly, knowing its work was only just beginning. The morning sun reflected off the wet streets of Onichikano, glimmering like scattered gold. Ngozi stood outside her small apartment, watching Chike play in the puddles, his laughter cutting through the hum of city life. Each day she survived and thrived, her heart stronger and her mind sharper. The hardships had made her resilient, and every smile from her son was a reminder that love and courage always outshine betrayal. Ngozi had begun offering classes in the community, teaching women literacy, trade skills, and business sense. People came from neighboring districts to learn from her. Her apartment had transformed into a hub of hope, bustling with energy, conversation, and laughter. It was a testament to survival and perseverance, built on patience, love, and unshakable determination. Ifani, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse apartment, alone, surrounded by objects that once symbolized power and success. Yet they now felt like chains. Clients pulled out deals daily, and the social circles that had once praised him now whispered about his failures. The emptiness was heavy. The life he had chased, built on betrayal and ambition, was crumbling. The contrast between their lives could not have been sharper. Ngozi, though poor, was rich in influence, love, and purpose. Ifani, though wealthy, was hollow, abandoned by everyone he had relied upon. Fate had begun to weave a tapestry that reflected the truth. Betrayal carries consequences, resilience brings reward. That evening, Ngozi held Chike in her arms, singing softly, "No matter the hardship, we rise. No matter the pain, we endure. And one day, we see justice." Outside, the city glowed, carrying whispers of lives changed by courage and misfortune alike. High in the penthouse, Ifani stared blankly at the city lights. Adetokunbo had left him after discovering his repeated failures and his inability to manage the empire they had built together. His friends, once eager to flatter him, now avoided his calls. Even casual acquaintances whispered behind his back, spreading stories of the man who abandoned love and lost everything in pursuit of ambition. Each night was longer than the last. The luxury around him, marble floors, chandeliers, expensive wine, brought no comfort. He remembered Ngozi and the warmth of her smile, the way she had cared for him, the hope she had carried. But that life was gone, replaced by cold surfaces, shallow applause, and growing anxiety. Meanwhile, Ngozi continued to grow in confidence and influence. Women came to her for guidance, children sought her attention, and neighbors treated her as a symbol of resilience. Chike thrived, picking up lessons of courage and morality from his mother's daily example. Her small apartment had become a sanctuary, alive with laughter, learning, and hope. Ifani realized that ambition without loyalty leads to isolation. Every failed deal, every abandoned client, and every estranged friend served as a reminder that life's true wealth comes from love, integrity, and commitment. Yet the realization came too late. Fate had already begun reclaiming what he had taken for granted. By nightfall, Ifani sat silently, pouring drink after drink, staring at the empty skyline, feeling the hollow echo of his choices reverberate. Outside, the city thrived, indifferent yet exacting, reminding him that betrayal carries a cost, and justice, patient, relentless, and inevitable, waits for no one. Ngozi's influence spread beyond her neighborhood. Women from nearby towns came seeking her guidance. Young girls admired her courage, and mothers respected her resilience. She taught literacy, small-scale entrepreneurship, and trade skills, while Chike played quietly beside her, absorbing lessons of patience and determination. The local media began taking notice, reporting stories of her courage, influence, and the transformation she had brought to her community. A woman who rose from betrayal to inspire an entire district, headlines read. Every story reinforced her reputation, elevating her beyond survival into leadership. Meanwhile, Ifani's life became a public spectacle of failure. Investors withdrew, socialites ignored him, and his once shiny reputation tarnished. Invitations to elite events ceased, and gossip about the man who abandoned love in pursuit of wealth became commonplace. The city had begun repaying him, subtly yet painfully, for the choices he had made. Ngozi, however, remained untouched by envy or malice. Her focus was on growth, teaching, and nurturing her son. Every small victory was a testament to endurance, every smile from Chike a symbol of the life she had fought to protect. By evening, she sat on the balcony with Chike in her lap, watching the lights of Onichikano glimmer like stars on wet streets. She whispered, "We rise through love, courage, and patience. The rest is fate." One day, while Ngozi was returning from the market, she spotted Ifani walking down a crowded street. The city seemed to freeze around him. He looked older, wearier, and his once confident stride faltered as he saw her. Her eyes met his, calm, strong, unwavering. And for a moment, the man who had abandoned love felt the full weight of regret. Ngozi did not speak immediately. She walked past him, holding Chike's hand, showing not fear or anger but resilience. Every step she took radiated the power of a woman who had endured, survived, and thrived despite betrayal. Ifani's jaw tightened, but he could not find words. The silence said everything. She had moved on, while he was trapped in the consequences of his choices. For Ngozi, it was not revenge but justice in its purest form, to live fully, lovingly, and with integrity. The city witnessed the unspoken triumph of resilience over betrayal, love over ambition, and courage over greed. Weeks later, Ifani's empire officially began to crumble. A major client publicly announced their withdrawal from a deal, citing mismanagement and negligence. The news spread across the city and social media, humiliating him in front of former colleagues, investors, and acquaintances. His luxurious apartment felt emptier with each passing day. Ngozi, on the other hand, continued to expand her influence. She helped families start small businesses, taught women trades, and mentored young girls. Chike, now beginning to walk steadily, mirrored his mother's confidence and curiosity. Her life, though humble in wealth, was abundant in meaning, love, and respect. Ifani tried desperately to salvage relationships and rebuild credibility, but no apology or charm could erase the public record of his failures and betrayals. Fate, patient and deliberate, had begun delivering its most visible consequences. At home, Ngozi taught Chike lessons not found in books. "We endure, my son," she whispered. "We rise with patience, kindness, and courage. Those who betray may prosper briefly, but love and integrity always prevail in the end." Chike's tiny hands held hers as if understanding every word. Meanwhile, Ifani faced mounting losses. A rival investor openly mocked his mistakes during a business luncheon, leaving him humiliated in front of peers. His lavish lifestyle, once envied, was now a symbol of failure. Ngozi's growing influence contrasted sharply with his decline. Fate had shifted the scales entirely. One life flourishing through endurance, the other collapsing under the weight of ambition and betrayal. The city's elite no longer invited Ifani to gatherings. Friends avoided him, whispering about his mismanagement and abandonment of Ngozi. Even Adito Kunbo publicly severed ties, distancing herself from the man whose life had become a cautionary tale. Ngozi, meanwhile, continued inspiring women in her community. Her influence spread across districts, earning her admiration and respect. Every act of kindness, mentorship, and love amplified her reputation, cementing her as a figure of integrity in a city that had once ignored her struggles. Ngozi opened a small cooperative for women, teaching trade, literacy, and saving skills. The center became a hub of empowerment, attracting attention from local leaders. Chike played nearby, absorbing lessons in resilience and integrity. The life Ngozi had fought for was no longer just survival. It was thriving, inspiring, and shaping the future. Ifani watched from his crumbling penthouse as the city buzzed below, a reminder of the life he had abandoned. Wealth, power, and ambition could not restore what he had lost: love, respect, and integrity. Every failed deal, every abandoned client, and every public humiliation tightened the noose around Ifani's life. The city whispered, judgment passed silently but decisively. He realized that his choices, greed, betrayal, and ambition over love, had consequences he could no longer avoid. Ngozi, meanwhile, held Chike and looked out over the city lights, calm and serene. The storm of betrayal had passed, replaced by a future full of promise, love, and justice. Her life and her son's life were thriving, untouched by malice, guided by courage. The day came when Ifani faced a public confrontation. Former clients demanded repayment, investors refused communication, and social circles whispered his failures loudly. The man who had abandoned love for luxury now confronted the full weight of consequences. Ngozi, by contrast, continued her quiet rise. Her cooperative thrived, her influence expanded, and Chike grew stronger each day. The city watched, aware that justice had been served, not through violence or revenge, but through life itself. One life crumbled under betrayal. Another flourished through resilience, courage, and love. That night, Ngozi whispered to Chike, "This is the way of life, my son. Love and integrity endure. Betrayal carries its price, and those who survive with courage will always rise." The sun rose over Onichikano, casting long shadows along the busy streets. Ngozi stood at the entrance of her small cooperative, greeting women and children with warmth. She had become a symbol of resilience. People sought her guidance not only in trade but in life, for hope, courage, and inspiration. Chike, now toddling confidently beside her, mimicked her movements, learning through observation what she taught with words. "Watch and learn, my son," she whispered. "Strength comes from patience, courage, and love." Every small step he took reflected her teachings, her values embedded in his very being. Meanwhile, Ifani's financial troubles deepened. Suppliers refused to deliver goods, contracts were canceled, and rumors of bankruptcy spread through the city's elite circles. The man who had abandoned love for ambition now faced public humiliation. Every effort to rebuild failed, leaving him isolated, anxious, and bitter. Ngozi, despite growing fame and influence, remained humble. She spent her mornings teaching women literacy and trade, her afternoons organizing community events, and her evenings holding Chike close, whispering lessons of courage. Life, though challenging, was rich with purpose and meaning. Fate, silent and patient, had begun its final orchestration. One life flourished through endurance, another faltered under betrayal. The city, indifferent yet perfectly just, witnessed the balance tipping steadily toward the side of integrity and love. The penthouse, once a symbol of triumph, now echoed with emptiness. Ifani poured himself a drink, staring blankly at the city below. Former friends avoided him. Adetokunbo had severed ties, leaving him utterly alone. Each message that came through his phone reminded him of what he had lost: respect, friendship, love, and trust. He thought of Ngozi and Chike, imagining the life he could have had. But the memory brought no comfort, only regret. His ambition and greed had built walls of gold around him, but those walls became a prison. Every glimmering surface reflected a hollow, bitter existence. Ngozi, in her modest apartment, was surrounded by laughter, learning, and life. Women sought her advice, children ran around playing. Chike's laughter filled the room. Her influence and love radiated outward, quietly changing lives and inspiring hope. Ifani tried to reach out to former clients, but his reputation had crumbled too far. Wealth could not undo betrayal. Power could not erase consequences. The city had begun repaying him, slowly but with precision, for the life he had chosen to abandon. That night, Ngozi tucked Chike into bed, whispering, "Even when the world is harsh, we rise. Even when hearts are broken, we endure. And those who betray must face the consequences." Far above, Ifani felt the first tremors of a life unraveling completely. Ngozi's cooperative expanded. Women who had once struggled with poverty now had small businesses, literacy, and confidence. Children learned basic skills alongside Chike. Her influence spread beyond her neighborhood, drawing admiration from local leaders and media. Chike, now learning to read and write, absorbed lessons of resilience from his mother. Ngozi spoke to him daily about honesty, courage, and integrity, planting seeds that would grow into a strong, moral foundation. Ifani's financial losses intensified. Suppliers refused to deliver, deals fell through, and investors publicly expressed frustration. Humiliation followed him in social circles and in the news. The man who had once walked confidently among the elite was now avoided, whispered about, and mocked. The contrast was undeniable. Ngozi, humble yet powerful, thriving in purpose and influence. Ifani, wealthy yet hollow, isolated and shamed. Fate had begun delivering justice in full measure. A major business meeting, intended to rescue Ifani's reputation, turned disastrous. Clients openly questioned his decisions, laughing at his excuses. News cameras caught the scene, spreading his humiliation across social media. He could no longer hide behind wealth or charm. Meanwhile, Ngozi's cooperative received a small government grant to expand its reach. Women celebrated, children cheered, and Chike laughed beside his mother, absorbing lessons of resilience. Her life, though simple, was filled with purpose, love, and recognition, the kind of wealth Ifani had never understood. Fate, patient and precise, was now unmistakable. One life had flourished through courage, another had collapsed under betrayal. At home, Ngozi sat with Chike under the soft glow of a lamp. She whispered, "Justice does not always come quickly, my son, but it comes. Those who betray, those who abandon love, must face the consequences of their actions, and those who endure with courage will rise." Chike listened intently, absorbing lessons of morality and resilience from the woman who had shaped his early life with strength and wisdom. Ngozi's life was a living example of what it meant to endure, survive, and rise above betrayal. Ifani, in his penthouse, felt increasingly powerless. Every attempt to regain control failed. Social circles avoided him. Clients distrusted him. Wealth could not restore what he had lost. Fate was now delivering the full reckoning. The city of Onichikano buzzed with news of both lives. Conversations about Ngozi's resilience spread, inspiring young women and mothers. Stories of Afani's failures were whispered, then shared openly, a cautionary tale of ambition without integrity. Ngozi's apartment became a sanctuary of hope. Children learned, women traded, and Chike played, absorbing lessons of courage. Every act of kindness reinforced her reputation. Fate's scales had tilted unmistakably, one life empowered by resilience, the other destroyed by betrayal. Ifani tried to salvage his remaining deals, but investors refused, friends avoided him, and public opinion condemned him. His luxurious apartment became a cage of regret. Nights were sleepless, days were heavy with anxiety. He realized too late that love, loyalty, and integrity were worth more than wealth. Ngozi, meanwhile, continued to thrive quietly. Her influence, kindness, and courage spread through the city. Chike grew stronger, absorbing the lessons of endurance and morality. Her life became a beacon of hope for everyone around her. A prominent business partner publicly criticized Afani for abandoning his responsibilities, humiliating him at a meeting broadcast across the city. Investors laughed, clients withdrew, and social circles abandoned him entirely. He was now a man isolated by his own ambition and betrayal. Ngozi, on the other hand, received accolades for her work in empowering women and children. Her apartment buzzed with activity, filled with laughter, learning, and purpose. Chike's laughter echoed, a symbol of hope and justice fulfilled. Ngozi's life reached a peak of influence and respect. The cooperative thrived. Children learned skills and morality. Women gained independence. Chike grew strong, kind, and curious, embodying the lessons of resilience taught by his mother. Ifani, wealthy but powerless, faced the bitter truth: betrayal carries consequences. He had abandoned love and integrity, and now his empire, his friends, and his reputation lay in ruins. Fate had delivered its verdict. Years later, Ngozi walked through the city with Chike, now a bright and confident boy. The cooperative had expanded, her influence spread across districts, and lives had been transformed by her courage and integrity. She smiled, knowing that despite betrayal, poverty, and heartbreak, she had endured and triumphed. Ifani, in contrast, lived alone in a small apartment, stripped of status, wealth, and friends. Every failure reminded him of the choices he had made. He had learned, too late, that love, loyalty, and integrity outweigh ambition, wealth, and desire. Ngozi whispered to Chike, "Justice is patient, my child. It comes to those who endure and live with courage, and it always finds those who betray." The city hummed below, indifferent yet perfect in its justice. The story ended not in violence, but in the quiet, undeniable triumph of resilience, love, and integrity over betrayal and ambition. One life had flourished, the other had crumbled. Fate had spoken, and balance was restored. Please subscribe, share, like, and comment for more videos.